Welcome to Villa of Hope Radio. Brought to you by Villa of Hope, partnering with individuals, families, and communities to rebuild relationships, recover potential, renew hope for the future. Villa of Hope is all about your personal journey because you matter. Now, with caring hope and respect, we're proud to bring you Villa of Hope Radio.
Hello and welcome to the Villa of Hope radio show. Villa of Hope, where you can rebuild relationships, recover potential, and renew hope. I'm your host today, Gerianne Puskas, Chief Advancement Officer at the Villa. Thank you for tuning into our show. We have some wonderful guests with us today from Villa of Hope. As we begin a new year with a new president and new vaccines, we want to talk about proactivity, positivity, and prevention. I'm very excited to welcome back Carrie Carl from a previous show. She's our Chief Strategy Officer at the Villa. Carrie, for our listeners who may be new to the show right now, can you tell us a little bit about what you do in your role as a Chief Strategy Officer?
Sure. Thank you, Gerianne. I'm so happy to be here this afternoon. So as the Chief Strategy Officer, the number one thing that I contribute is helping the organization move from our current state to our 2030 vision state. And I'm hoping to get a chance to talk a little more about the 2030 vision this afternoon in the time we have together. But it's really about organizing our efforts in order to move us from current to future state. I also have pieces in business intelligence, which is how we organize our data systems to be able to measure the progress we're making toward those goals and the impact that we're having on the people we serve and therefore the community that we are serving here at the Villa. And I also do some project management pieces. So, for example, we have a farm to table project, which is going to build on the existing horticulture and human ecology components in our Villa of Hope school and integrate those with our workforce development program so that we can actually grow food, produce and food to serve not only the residents here that are living on our campus, but eventually we want to scale it up to serve the Greece community and then the larger Monroe County and City of Rochester communities as well.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, that's great.
Yeah. And I'm also excited, by the way, that about our detox project. So folks have probably heard that we will be opening a detox program later this year. And of course, that requires a project team because that pulls, from every angle of the organization to make sure that we have that program up and ready to go as soon as possible because we know the need is out there.
Yes, absolutely. And it's interesting to hear you talk about data, quality improvement, and some of those data analytics pieces because Villa of Hope is a human services agency, and a lot of people don't see the work that we do as also a type of a business model that we have to be, right? We are beholden to our donors on how we're spending the funds that we receive. So to know that we are investing in quality improvement, business intelligence to make sure that we're doing the right things, we're getting the right outcomes the best way possible is fantastic. It's really good to hear that, and I'm sure the listeners appreciate that too. So.
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it's about getting the biggest bang for every buck to the betterment of the people we serve and the community that they live in.
Oh, community can't ask for more. That's awesome. and I'm sure it keeps you very busy too.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. So, and speaking of busy, as we know, COVID-19 is kind of throwing a wrench in a lot of things. So as the Chief Strategy Officer and knowing that a lot of nonprofits and a lot of businesses' strategies have been disrupted by the pandemic, how do you feel that the pandemic has affected the Villa's strategy right now?
That's a great question, Gerianne. And I think what I would say is Villa of Hope prepared ourselves so proactively for the pandemic. For example, getting ready for, the impact of the governor's stay-at-home order. We were ready for that before it was issued because you could kind of anticipate that things might move in that direction. So operationally, we certainly had to make adjustments. We had to figure out how to support our staff who might have exposure and have to quarantine or even become positive and ill and be out of work. So how do we then make sure the services are continuing despite those absences? In our residential programs, figuring out for the youth that are living in those programs, where are we going to put them if we need to quarantine someone or put them in an isolation location? Certainly there was a financial impact on the operational side. You have to buy all the personal protective equipment, the PPE.
Surprise items, right?
Cleaning supplies that were not in the budget, at the beginning of the fiscal year. But having said all of that, the impact of the pandemic on the Villa has really been on the operational side and not on the strategic side. It's been very important to us that we figure out how to ensure that the pandemic does not take us off our course. We recreated and renovated our vision statement to a 2030 vision statement, and nothing is going to make us waver off of that path. Yes, we have to figure out these other things that are unexpected in the short run, but our long-term vision has not been impacted.
Well, that's very good to hear. I'm sure it's not easy, though, to stay on that path, as things are coming at you from the side, and to stay focused on what is ahead and thinking about putting the community first, right? The community's needs are kind of at that pinnacle there ahead of us.
Yep.
So it's definitely is some work.
Exactly, yeah.
And so it's kind of rare to hear that, it's not perfect thanks to COVID, but that the Villa is really strong and really focused on the path forward. What are some of the things that you think are helping to keep the Villa on that path? What pieces of strategy are being worked on to keep it going?
Mm-hmm. Well, let me first of all make sure I'm clear on what that 2030 vision is. So Villa of Hope's 2030 vision statement is that we will advance human potential by transforming the social foundations of our neighbors, elevating lifelong health outcomes for our community. So everything we're doing is moving in that direction. Along those lines, our vision has 4 strategic elements that are based on our assessment of current needs in our community as well as projected future needs in our community. For example, needs that are in demand whether COVID exists or not include mental health, substance use, unemployment, coordination of care for people who need multiple services, and also education. So we've identified what we call, sort of the nickname here at the Villa, our 4 pillar programs. And those are our behavioral health clinics, our workforce development program, our Villa of Hope school, and our case management programs. So by zeroing in on those beams in the framework of our community, we know what direction we're headed in and how we're going to get there.
Well, that's great. So what you're doing is always in demand. It's not going to go out of style. It's not the fad of today. It is the basically the pillar of needs in the community are the ones that we are investing in going forward. So, and that really does sound like a model for success. So, thinking about that's our kind of our business and our strategic model. Mm-hmm. Villa is a Sanctuary certified organization. So can you tell our listeners what Sanctuary is?
Sure. Yeah, this is one of my favorite Villa topics to talk about. So thanks for asking. Sanctuary is a trauma-informed organizational culture model. And what that means is Sanctuary understands that all human beings are exposed to trauma, whether that's kind of the traditional types of events that come to mind when we think about trauma, and or chronic toxic stress. And the past 10 months of the pandemic are a great example of that chronic toxic stress that folks get exposed to. Sanctuary teaches us that exposure actually impacts us in predictable ways. And if we can then mitigate those negative impacts by being intentional in the way that we are with each other, so it's the way we are with each other as colleagues, as well as the way we are with the people we're serving, we can actually mitigate the impacts of trauma and chronic toxic stress. Now, along those lines, the model has several different, what they call pillars as well. A couple of my favorites are the 7 commitments of Sanctuary, as well as the self model. So if you want to, I'd be happy to go into those in a little more detail.
Great. Well, I think that's a good idea, because I think the 7 commitments are really excellent to have on hand. They're a great way to have some shared language. So if you could share with our audience today, just briefly list what the 7 commitments are, and I think that'll resonate, and maybe we can talk a little bit more as we talk about looking to the future and maybe some New Year's resolutions, we can talk about how that fits in.
Sure.
So what are those?
Yeah, so the 7 sanctuary commitments include social responsibility, growth and change, democracy, but not the political kind, emotional intelligence, open communication, social learning, and nonviolence. So just as an example, these commitments are the way that we are with each other in our interactions and our relationships. So as we think about the discord in our country this past year, these commitments offer a great way to just start bringing us back together towards unity. And that makes me actually think about, January is the time of year where people think about New Year's resolutions. So even if you've already broken I'm going to eat healthy, I'm going to go to the gym every day, or whatever that looked like for you.
Yeah.
The commitments are actually a really cool way to rethink the commitments that you can make to yourself and those around you.
Oh, I love that idea. And even if somebody were to take 1 or 2 of those, right? So now's your time. If you have missed your opportunity, or you've missed a few days at the gym, or you had that piece of pizza or chocolate cake, these are commitments that you can really stick to and you can embed in the work that you're doing. So let's talk about maybe some ways that we could build them into some resolutions, or how can I go forward and really build this into kind of how I operate with people.
Sure. All right. Well, hey, we'll just kind of run through the list and see what examples we come up with.
Great.
So social responsibility is really about, reciprocity in a relationship. It's about appreciation, being reliable, being accountable, being positive. So if you've ever had the pleasure of raising a teenager, for example,
oh, yes.
you know that, when soccer practice is over at 5:30, you kind of got to be there at 5:30. You got to be that reliable source. I'm going to be present when, where, and how I said I would be.
Mm-hmm.
It's about making sure that you're making promises that you can keep, especially with the people closest to you.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
And those are often when those promises aren't fulfilled, cause a lot of issues, right? Those can create a lot of emotion, especially with teenagers.
Exactly.
We'll say.
Yeah.
So, great.
All right. So let's tackle growth and change. Growth and change is really about thinking about yourself as a lifelong learner. So, what is it that you want to do differently? What new thing do you want to try? What innovation do you want to think through? How can you inspire others to join you in those efforts? Is that a new hobby? Is that reading a book on a person or a subject that you haven't explored in the past? And seeing if you can bring others along on that journey as well. So, there's that saying that says the only constant is change. And growth and change as a commitment really just says we're going to lean into that. We're going to embrace that. It is what it is, so let's make the most of it.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, my resolution this year is to learn how to be a radio show host, and thank you for joining me on this journey. I appreciate it.
Absolutely my pleasure.
So with that, I think maybe one that we could talk about is democracy, because that's about all voices, right?
Absolutely, yeah. I mentioned before. So democracy is not about political parties, but it's really about everyone having a voice. So within an organization like ours, we know that it's not strictly about giving people a vote on a decision that has to be made. Decisions need to be made by the leaders that are charged with those decisions. But in order to make the best possible decisions, you want to include all of the voices at the table. So referencing back again, you can tell I have some teenagers. This can be as simple as just asking their input on something. That can be which restaurant we're getting takeout from this evening, where we want to go on our next vacation, and when travel opens up again at some point.
Right.
So it's really just about giving shared voice, but not necessarily the bottom line decision. That sometimes still has to sit with a higher power.
Well, and I think that's important to distinguish, because it's one thing to take in and to listen to all voices, but at some point there also has to be a decision that is to the best benefit of all, really. So just because you're listening to everybody doesn't mean that everybody has to win if they need a winner or not. But we want to hear, because maybe next time that will resonate and we'll do something different.
Absolutely.
Because of what you said today.
You got it.
So
you got
excellent.
it. Yeah.
So great. So the next one that maybe we can talk about because this will come in if you don't get your way through democracy. Emotional intelligence.
Yeah, so emotional intelligence is really about being compassionate, being respectful, and being self-aware. I think people really miss this when we first start talking about and teaching emotional intelligence. If you're not really clear on where you are, how you're feeling, what your true motivations are in an interaction or a conversation, then chances are decent that it's going to go sideways at some point. So, I sometimes actually think about emotional intelligence in partnership with the next commitment, which is open communication. Mm-hmm. I happen to be someone I'm honest with folks. I'm a middle child, so I'm like that stereotypical conflict avoidant person. And I've really had to learn how to say, first of all, that disagreement and conflict is not a bad thing. It's a healthy thing. But if you really think about emotional intelligence, which is being self-aware, like aware of myself and my impact on others, and blending that with open communication, this is often as, I'm going to put it in quotation marks, simple as mean what you say, but don't be mean in the way that you say it.
I love that. That's great.
Yeah. And then, just real quick, we still got a couple more to go. Social learning is really about that no one person can be an expert on everything. So let's pool and pull our shared knowledge together in order to make the best decisions moving forward. So in life, this can be about learning more about retirement investing, or maybe more about someone whose political views are different than yours, and at least trying to have some common understanding around that. And last but not least is the commitment to nonviolence.
Yes.
And this really is about 4 different kinds of nonviolence. Of course, everyone can automatically think about physical violence, but we also think about emotional, ethical, and social nonviolence. So how am I being with myself? How am I being with others? And am I doing the right thing even when no one's looking?
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So that's not going through the red light at 3 a.m, right? It's stopping for it?
Yep. And it's, for me, it's watching the speedometer.
Mm-hmm. I think everybody listening probably has that one thing that, oh boy, if I thought I could get away with it, I would.
Yes.
Social responsibility tells us do the right thing when no one's looking.
Absolutely.
So, and I think that's one of those pieces that over the long term, throughout our lives, the more we do that and the more we role model that for others, the better it is for everybody.
Absolutely.
Well. Yep. Well, Carrie, you've given us a lot to think about right now. And I know we're going into a break, so I'm going to use that time to think about some resolutions and how we can make things a little bit better. So, listeners, I want to ask you what commitment-based resolution you're going to make for this year. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll be hearing more about the sanctuary model and how the power of positivity can change and heal wounds.
Villa of Hope is in this with you. Fear of COVID-19 and uncertainty about the future creates a need for many people to get more support from their community. For many, things like not knowing how you can access childcare so you can go to work, wondering if you can go to work, and not being able to pick up the groceries you need because of empty shelves can cause anxiety and stress. This is serious. Talk to someone. Call 1-833-993-HOPE.
Welcome back to the Villa of Hope radio show. Villa of Hope, rebuild, recover, and renew hope for the future. We are here with Carrie Carl, Chief Strategy Officer of Villa of Hope, and I'm really looking forward to this segment. We're going to start this segment with something the Villa calls a community meeting, and it's not what people normally think of when you hear that. Mm-hmm. So, Carrie, what is the community meeting about? Is the town going to show up to this segment?
Probably not with the weather that we're having outside. I can see the plows going back and forth
already.
Hear
the plows in the background.
Yes, and the salt going down. So how about this? Why don't we just walk through a community meeting, kind of role play it, so to speak, and then circle back and I'll kind of talk through what the different pieces mean through that trauma-informed sanctuary model that I mentioned before. So if you could just play along and trust me, I'll take you to a trauma-informed community meeting place.
Great.
All right, Gerianne, how are you feeling today?
I am feeling happy and courageous today.
All right. And what is your goal for today or this time together?
to not trip on my words and to support you as you're helping me today.
All right. And who will you ask for help?
Carrie, I'm going to ask you for help today.
I've got your back.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So then I would ask you.
Yes, exactly.
Carrie, how are you feeling today?
I am feeling energized and hopeful.
What is your goal for our time together today?
To spread the good word to everyone who's listening about the sanctuary model and what it can offer to all of us, even if you're not working at Villa of Hope.
Who are you going to ask for help?
I'm going to ask you.
Carrie, I've got your back.
Thank you. All right, so that's as simple and quick as it goes, and yet there's so many layers behind it. The first question, how are you feeling today? So one of the things we know about trauma and toxic chronic stress is that it tends to disconnect people with their feelings. So this question is really about recentering. It's getting us back to that self-awareness that we talked about with emotional intelligence in the last segment, so that we can just be grounded as we're getting ready to move through the next conversation that we're going to have in that meeting or that time together. What is your goal for today or our time together? What we know about trauma and exposure to chronic toxic stress is that it tends to give people a shortened sense of future. So this is really a future-focused question. Okay. Even if the future is just the next 10 minutes that you and I are having a conversation here today, but it does just stretch that back out so that folks can reconnect with a future and a sense of hope, something that they're working toward or looking forward to. Who will you ask for help? We know that trauma and toxic stress tend to disconnect us. Some folks, especially folks who are maybe a little more introverted to start with, tend to kind of circle the wagons and go inside themselves, whether literally and or figuratively. So this is a way of reconnecting us so that we can then say, who will you ask for support? And then you might have noticed, you did a great job of giving it back to me, that validation of, I've got your back. Mm-hmm. So, it's reconnecting us, first of all, in knowing who will we ask for help, and then having that validation back from that person. Like, don't worry, I'll figure out how to support you if you need me.
Yeah. And so what I like about that is we're here together, we're working on a project together. And I know that you've got my back. So I know if I get stuck, you're going to prompt me or you're going to help me somehow. Or I can go and say, Carrie, I need your help.
Yep.
And you'll be there for me, which really means a lot in the work environment because, yes, it can be traumatic work, any environment, any work environment. So
exactly. That's
really important. Mm-hmm. And I think back to my experience in nonprofits. I've been doing this, I'm going to age myself here. I've been doing this over 25 years in nonprofits, most of them several national nonprofits and health-based nonprofits. So, you would think there would be that kind of that aspect of how are you feeling today? But usually it's only the obligatory, hi, how are you? Exactly. And somebody is usually halfway down the hallway before you say, I'm fine, because you don't really have an answer. So I haven't touched base with my emotions at that point. I am responding, and I don't even know I'm responding half the time, or I'm asking that question, and I don't know if I really mean it.
Right.
So this really helps to put a focus on that. And for us, too, as we spoke in the last segment about being self-aware, to put a name on it. And to be aware of how am I feeling, not always easy to do.
Exactly. Right.
And personally, I see how this works at Villa of Hope. It's not the only thing that we do. So it's not like if you take this back to your business listeners and expect a complete culture change because you're having community meetings. Yes, it will have an impact, but it's not the only thing that is the only tool in the toolbox.
Exactly.
Of Sanctuary.
Mm-hmm.
So. The community meeting supports the commitments and the framework for how we work with the people that we serve and each other. But there's another tool in the toolbox that's really important because I think it brings all of this together. Mm-hmm. And it's that self model that you mentioned earlier. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm so glad you asked me to circle back on that because people are probably wondering, what was that self thing that you mentioned? Yeah. All right, so what I usually say is, human service organizations often employ professionals from a wide range of specialized backgrounds and orientations. And sometimes those varied professionals speak in terms that aren't really clear to each other or to the people they serve. So the Sanctuary model has an acronym, SELF, and that stands for safety, emotion management, loss, and future. So those 4 components are the organizing framework for treatment planning, for community conversations, for collaborative decision making, for trauma-informed problem solving when there is some kind of conflict that we need to work through. And that framework allows providers to focus on the most important aspects of helping people heal from trauma in a simple and accessible way. So as you can see, we actually talked about some of those elements in the previous segment of this show, specifically safety, meaning our commitment to nonviolence, emotion management, and future. And that really helps to build the resources and tools for coping with trauma and continued exposure to chronic toxic stress that can come in the future as well.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about reoccurring and chronic stress. And, the way this seems to be built is that they're going to keep reiterating these in a little bit of a different way. And we're going to use this tool or this aspect just a little bit differently. And so at the end of the day, when you talk about emotional intelligence or emotion management or how are you feeling today, you have practiced self-awareness in many different ways throughout the day.
Yep.
And I think that's so important for so many of the people that we serve, because it gives them the opportunity to, as we said earlier, to put a name on it, but to say and acknowledge, I've been through trauma, and I'm angry, or I need to find hope. I'm feeling hopeless, or I just need a little direction, whatever level, or they've been through some counseling. I'm happy. I'm feeling accomplished.
Right.
And to be able to put those words to it really makes such a big difference in how people respond to the treatment that they're getting, because they can really mark the progression based on how they're feeling, because they know how to do that.
Yeah.
So.
And these tools and these frameworks are not secret. Like, we share these and teach these to the people we serve so that we can use them in every interaction with them.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic.
It's like having secret sauce, but not having the recipe be secret.
Yeah, so it's just dump it all over. It's
That's
good
right.
stuff.
Yep.
So one thing that I see as we go through this, and one thing that these tools help to generate is positivity. And so we want to talk about positivity in light of everything that goes on around us and the effect that can have. So, and there's a difference between positivity and optimism. So this is something that I ran across, and I had to do a little bit of research on. Positivity is an active behavior. It is a choice in how you behave. Optimism is passive. It is, I have faith that things will be okay. I'm not doing anything about it. I have faith that it'll be okay. So, and there's a place for that too. There's a place for each. So, I do have one quote, and I usually don't quote, but I think this is really important. In the book, 3 Differences Between Optimism and Positivity, the author states, optimism makes an assumption about the world. It assumes that everything will work out all right in the end. On the other hand, positive thinking makes no assumptions about how the external world will be. Instead, it considers how I or we will respond to external circumstances. The leader who chooses positive thinking does not assume all the odds will be in his or her favor. Instead, the positive leader puts confidence in the self or the team's ability to act and respond in effective ways. So I think that lines it up very well, that positivity is about action.
It certainly is. I feel like, if I were at a poetry reading, I'd be snapping my fingers right now. Isn't that what they do when they feel synergy with the poem? What I like about that, Gerianne, is, in the most fundamental way, when we work with people who have survived trauma, in the more classical sense of trauma, one of the most fundamental things that you do in that care, in that relationship, is you give choice. Choice about next steps, choice about big decisions, little decisions, every decision in between. And in that choice, there is action. There is intentional action. So I'm a believer. I'm probably going to have you email me that book reference so I can pick that up and do some reading myself.
I will. In fact, just because I was so intrigued with this topic, and I was actually doing some research on this as I had the TV on January 6th with everything going on at the Capitol. So I was seeking ways to be positive and trying to get to the bottom of positivity. And there's one author that I think, if you've ever read him, I'm pretty sure you have, Viktor Frankl and Man's Search for Meaning.
Oh, yes, I have. Mm-hmm.
It's a must-read. Listeners, if you haven't read it, read it, because for being in such dire circumstances, this book is so full of hope at the same time. If you could take the absolute worst place that you could be in the world and to find hope, it's just simply amazing. And it helps to put things into perspective and find the lens that we need to get through the next day and what's coming our way. So one of the quotes that was in the book, and I think of this one a lot actually, is, "A positive attitude enables a person to endure suffering and disappointment as well as enhance enjoyment and satisfaction. A negative attitude intensifies pain and deepens disappointments. It undermines and diminishes pleasure, happiness, and satisfaction. It may even lead to depression or physical illness." So, we really are in control of how we respond and approach things, and ultimately how we feel physically, if it can make that connection. So, why don't we talk a little bit about the effect of trauma on the brain, which is that physical effect on the brain of trauma.
Wow. So that quote is so powerful. I have read that book, and let me just, give a little context or response to that quote. What that quote really says to me, and what the book says to me, is you will find what you seek. You will see what you're looking for, regardless of the conditions and circumstances that you're in any moment in time. So what happens, first of all, in terms of the effects of trauma on the brain, I have this little mantra that I use in trainings on this topic, and the mantra says, the neurons that fire together wire together, meaning the pathways in our brain that get used the most become like super highway pathways. They become, like the Autobahn in Germany, where they go fast and they are efficient and, they work the best because they're used the most. And, our brains are actually wired to, first and foremost, keep us safe and keep us alive. I mean, there's a whole reason why, of the 60,000 thoughts that pop into a person's head every day, 80% of them are negative. And I think that's really because our brain's first job is to keep us alive. So back in the day where there were, dinosaurs and bears and tigers everywhere you went, and you literally had to sense danger and react to that danger in a way that kept you alive.
Right.
Those are the super pathways. Those are the neurons that had to fire together, that became wired together, so that now, even in the year 2021, 60,000 thoughts, 80% negative.
Wow.
What this means in terms of healing is that we have to be intentional in interrupting that flow and exercising some different pathways in our brain. So this is where the power of positivity comes in and can heal that damage that's done by that exposure to trauma and toxic stress. Because, like I said, what we look for is what we will find. So when we can help a person start to rewire their brain, catching themselves in those moments of reliving that sense of being powerless and having no control, having no decision-making ability, having no action that a person can take.
Right.
When we can interrupt that, even in very small ways, in a consistent and persistent manner, the brain has shown tremendous capability to rewire, so that those other neurons that we start intentionally firing will actually wire together as well.
Wow. So it's kind of like the detour becomes the de facto route then. It's the new route.
Yes. And it takes a lot of effort. This is something that, even in the process of raising a teenager, 60,000 thoughts a day, 80% of them are negative. It's sometimes it's a task in and of itself to say, why would anyone act that way? How can I change the meaning I'm taking away from that behavior I'm getting from my teenager today, and see that there's actually a positive side to that.
Right.
And so I practice all of these lessons at home in my parenting and in my marriage as well, in my family relationships. But it's a great example of the neurons that fire together wire together.
So then if we're talking about rebuilding those pathways, I'm guessing that positivity and focus on the future can help to heal some of that damage. So it's such a hard leap, and I'm sure listeners would join us in this. It's a hard leap to believe that how I think, which is not a pill, it's not a surgery, it's not physical therapy, but how I think a non-medical intervention can actually heal damage in the brain. It's quite a leap. So help us make that.
Yeah. So it's really about the brain's capacity to heal, and also how the brain really is the central operating system for everything else that happens in our bodies. The brain controls it controls our heart rate, it controls our blood pressure, it controls our breathing, it controls what what am I thinking of? There's different substances that our brain can trigger, to be released in our body. Serotonin, for example, is a feel-good substance. Yeah. And there are other substances that actually, make us feel even more negative.
Like cortisol and some of those other.
Exactly. Okay. So in a stress response, someone is going to have those substances floating around saying, this is fight, flight, or freeze moment right now. This is life or death. And so your body is ready for that. What we're doing is we're being intentional in making decisions and taking actions that actually trick the brain and teach the brain to release some of those other substances to offset that. Hormones is the word that I'm looking for. Oh my goodness. Is it Monday? Because it feels like a Monday right now.
Second Monday.
Yeah. But there, so that is why actually, exercise is good. So we kind of teased that a lot of people make that New Year's resolution and then steer away from it over time. There's a lot of different reasons, why that can happen. But for what it's worth, like even the littlest choice in your day can put your brain in, in an operating mode where it is healing itself. And it's just an amazing thing that we're wired the way we are.
Well, I think the human body just is amazing in and of itself because of things like that. Mm-hmm. And we could probably spend a whole show or month of shows
Absolutely.
on that. So, I think our goal for today is to set a positive goal or resolution that hits on one of the 7 commitments and works on making our future what we want it to be. We make that choice.
Yes, and it doesn't have to be gigantic. It can just be something small that you're going to do once a day or several times a day and just be consistent with it over time.
I love it. Thank you. Carrie, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
I appreciate your time. This has been an amazing session to understand the inverse relationship between the effects of trauma and positivity. So I appreciate you being a part of the Villa of Hope radio show.
Thank you very much. And thank you to our audience for listening today.
So up next, after the break, how can we prevent some types of trauma? Stephanie Dawson and Amy Fideli from our Prevention Education Program will be joining us. Stay tuned.